What are some red flags of a situationship?
Ooh, oh my God, I'd be curious what you both think.
Oh.
So it's like, how do I be not specific?
Hey everyone, welcome back to the gray area, where we talk about the messy and in-between areas of college relationships. Last week, Jenny and Kyra talked about the new year and whether that means jumping into a new relationship or maybe focusing on yourself.
But today we're switching things up. But before we get into our discussion, let's introduce ourselves. So my name is Ekene, and I am a Q Bio major and global health major.
And I'm Chia. I'm a junior here at USC, and I'm majoring in global health. And today we do have a special guest. We have Deborah, who's a therapist here at USC Student Health, and I'll just let her introduce herself.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Deborah. I'm one of the clinical psychologists here at CareSC, which is our confidential advocacy resource and education support center here.
Welcome, Deborah.
Thanks.
So today we're going to be talking about situationships. So this might be relatable to you, maybe too relatable. So before we get started, let's just go ahead and define what situationships are. I guess I'll go first and kind of talk about what I see them as.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they're like maybe like casual relationships, but it's like more deeper than like a casual hookup. Like there's no label, but there is sort of that emotional connection.
Yeah.
Like more than like friends with benefits. Like it's almost a relationship, but not quite.
Right.
So I think that's what I see situationships as.
Like there's more intimacy.
Exactly.
Yeah. I feel like for me it's always been like, I've always had the idea that it was like an emotional connection, an emotional relationship without like the commitment or what people feel is like a burden of commitment.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like that's how I would define it.
So it feels like it's labelless.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Why it's called a situationship.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah, and yeah, I just feel like a lot of people are in situationships, and I guess I kind of wonder, like, especially in college, I kind of wonder, like, why are situationships, like, such a big thing in college?
Right.
And I did a little bit of brainstorming over that, like, over the last couple of days, and I feel like being in college, there's, like, so much going on, and there's, like, you're figuring out, like, when your midterms are, you're figuring out what assignments you have. So I feel like that contributes a lot to like why situationships are such a prominent thing in college.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
I feel like, yeah, exactly. People like want emotional intimacy and closeness, but
Exactly.
also with everything going on in their day-to-day lives, they just want to be able to have it in snippets and not fully commit to it.
Yeah.
So,
For some reason, maybe putting the label on it or having in committed relationships just seems more daunting or
Right.
overwhelming
Exactly.
when you have so many other things you have to focus on.
Exactly. Like I know for me, like if I was to like theoretically like be almost in a relationship, I feel like that would kind of scare me a little bit because I care about my grades a lot and I care about like, you know, being on top of my things, and I feel like if I get like the slightest that might be derailed by someone or some type of like relationship, especially since it takes like a lot of commitment, I feel like I wouldn't be like, you know, super excited to get into a relationship because of that reason.
yeah, I definitely feel like it can be a distraction. I feel like it can be a distraction.
Like these bananas.
I feel like it could be a distraction, especially like I know like from some of my friends' experiences that they felt that like their relationships consume them and they just like whenever their partner isn't happy then they're not happy, or like it just kind of dictates their emotion throughout their entire day or week, and something like that would definitely like derail you from being able to complete everyday tasks, especially like your schoolwork and like your actual work. So it's just like I could see why someone wouldn't want to carry that emotional like obligation with them and just opt into a situationship as opposed to a full-blown relationship.
Yeah, I also wonder if it's just like the timing, because a lot of people when you're coming to college, like you talked about a lot of commitments and obligations, but you're also really just figuring out who you are and like what you're interested in and who you want to be, and you know, you're kind of for the first time figuring out like what you grew up thinking. Is that still how you think? Is that still how you feel? Is that still what you value?
Exactly.
And so I think the commitment could be like, oh, I don't really even know myself and what I want, let alone who I want to be with or what kind of relationship I want to have. But I do want to have that closeness and I want to have someone that I connect with. So you kind of think you're getting the best of both worlds.
Right.
Exactly.
I think something that like we need to consider now is like, how do we navigate the situationship? Because I feel like a lot of people have been in those positions like, oh, what can I say to them without coming off too strong? Because it's like, we're not in a relationship, but we're like not close. Like, I don't know, you know, it's like complicated.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you said something interesting, which was like, you know, it feels like when you're committed, you're more worried about your partner's emotions and like it affects you more emotionally. But I am curious if you feel like with situationships, it has just as much of an impact emotionally, even though there isn't that label and commitment. Like, I do wonder if like when you are getting to those, like, what are we, or even just like getting just more emotionally invested in the other person because you have that connection, does it really avoid that complication?
That's a good point. That is a great point.
Yeah, and I feel like it has like maybe an equal amount of like, you know, it takes like an equal amount of emotional toll on a person as does a relationship, but also like it has that element of confusion then, because it's like,
which can add to
which adds even more,
right?
Yeah. So I guess a question for both of you guys and for me myself as well. Like, for an example, let's just say like you're in a situationship, everything's going cool and you feel loved every day, but then like a little voice in your head starts to like ask yourself like what are we, like what are we doing here, like how do you navigate that, like what do you think would be the first step to like, you know, clearing up those like thoughts in your head?
Yeah, I mean, I think one is like really paying attention to it, right? Because I think we all have a tendency to like have thoughts and be like, nah, I'm not gonna deal with that today.
Exactly.
Like push it down, or I have an exam. But I would say like really just pay attention to what's coming up for you, especially if it's something that's persistently like nagging at you, to allow yourself to pay attention to it and just get curious about it. Like, why might I be having these feelings now versus earlier? What maybe has changed in my life or in the relationship or the dynamic that's making me have these questions and thoughts?
Right.
Exactly.
And in framing like the question, like what are we, do you have like any like advice on like how to frame that question, or is there like a certain way you should ask?
Oh man, if there was, we'd all be doing it, right? We would have the best podcast ever. And I say that because like when I looked up situationships on Twitter, it was like millions and millions of like, you know, videos on like what to do, advice, or just various situations. So I think situationships are incredibly common, and this sort of what do I do and looking for outside advice. I mean, again, I go back to like really trust yourself. If you're having this thought or your needs aren't being met, like you really do need to, you know, address that and acknowledge that and not ignore it. And one way to do that is maybe think about how you could communicate that to the person, right? And so it may not mean like, I'm obsessed with you, I'm in love with you, let's get married, but it could be maybe like, I'm finding myself wanting more, or I'm finding myself thinking that this isn't as respectful as it was initially, and maybe we should be more monogamous. So it could be a variety of different things depending on what your needs are, but you have to figure that out first, right?
Exactly.
Because you're in the situationship.
Yeah.
But what do you want that you're not getting?
Exactly. I feel like those types of conversations are always hard to navigate, especially like in a situation where you feel like your needs were met at some point and then now it's like not being met, but then it's like, is it even worth communicating like to them? Because it's like, if they're not respecting me right now, then maybe I should just let it go. And like, if, you know, like.
And then there's always that voice in your head where it's like, if I bring this up, like, will this ruin what we have? Like, is it worth it to bring it up?
Yeah.
And like risk like the situationship that we have right now? Like, I guess it's like, just like having that like voice in your head where like, this is a risk and I don't want to take that risk.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
How do we make it like so that people don't see asking that question as a risk? Like,
I think it kind of is a risk. I think that like, but being in a situationship is a risk, even though we already discussed like how it feels like it's like less of an obligation or less daunting or less serious. At the end of the day, being in a situationship actually requires quite a bit of communication, right? It's like saying, I don't want to be serious, or I'm open to seeing other people. So like you actually are already engaging in communication to some extent.
Right.
And a situationship should always, regardless of you know, what you agree on or not, it should be mutual and respectful. So there should always be like that open communication.
Exactly.
And I think your needs and wants do change over time, right? Like you're not going to stay consistent even in a committed relationship. So being able to just feel okay with communicating some of your needs and doing that in ways that are kind of honest and direct, but leaving an open door. Like, how does that sound to you? Like, are you in the same, do you feel similar?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, are you, you know, open to compromise?
Yeah.
And also you have to go into those conversations with realistic expectations because I think it can be really heartbreaking to kind of like set yourself up for, you know, whether or not the person's gonna be cool with it or not.
Mm-hmm.
It's not all bad, but wouldn't you want to know if you were like, I really want to see if we can be monogamous, or I really want to see if we have more like potential, and the other person's like, no, I'm like really not that into you. I'm hanging out with other people here. Like, wouldn't you probably want to know that, even though that would be kind of a gut punch?
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of investing more and more time and then just like, you know, being strung along basically.
Right.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people are more comfortable in the unknown, but the unknown is just as painful as knowing.
Exactly.
So it's like you're not saving yourself anything, you're just delaying the pain.
Exactly.
Yeah, ignorance is bliss, but
right?
like at what cost, right?
Like, exactly.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of communication needed to navigate situationships, which is actually like kind of funny since I feel like that's what people are trying to avoid by getting into situationships, so they don't have to like do all of that. But yeah, I feel like that's the best way to go about navigating it, just to make sure that your needs are met and that you understand like your partner's needs at that point.
Absolutely. And I think, don't get me wrong, I think these relationships could be super casual and super chill. I just think it always is going to require some degree of communication.
Right.
So you can be like not caught up in any feelings, but still be really true and honest to someone about whether or not you want to see them and whether or not you're dating other people or whether or not you're going to have protected sex or not. Like those are all still parts of a conversation you can have. That doesn't mean we have to like amp up the ante. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't mean that we're all of a sudden like ball and chain, you know? So I think there's a lot of communication that goes into any of these relationships, but it's the vulnerability piece that I think is the hardest for people.
I think something that other people find hard to navigate is like the timing of it all. When should I ask these questions? So what would you say? Like, when should you ask, what are we? When should you ask, like, to set boundaries?
Yeah. Well, I would say from the beginning, always having boundaries in relationships is good. And that's just as simple as like your place or mine, or like what, you know, what time am I cool with you calling me and what time am I like, that's way too late. I don't know what you're thinking, right? So like, I think boundaries is always a part of the conversation, but I'd be curious to see what you all think, because I would think the what are we, or just having a more clarifying conversation would come when you're feeling like a need or want is met. But I don't know, what do you think?
No, I would definitely agree. I guess it's like when you feel like what you're getting right now isn't really enough, like you feel like the relationship that you guys are acting out or having in that moment is something that you feel needs a label to, you know, satisfy your own, you know, well-being and just like happiness in general. But then I also feel like in that moment you should also consider the other person as well. Like when you ask them that what are we question, you should be open to giving them time to answer that question as well. It shouldn't just be something that you would expect, like an automatic this or that. Like that person
that goes back to those expectations.
Exactly. That person might need time to, you know, think about what they want in that moment as well. Is this something they want to turn into a relationship? So I feel like being open to, you know, letting them think over that question is super important for, you know, our audience as well. Because I know for me, like, if I was to ask that question, I would be like, I need an answer right now.
Oh, yeah.
Sitting in that unknown again, right? Like, I just kind of put this out there. I want this thing. And you're like, give me a couple days. Like, it's going to be hard to tolerate that. But you've had time to think through what you're feeling and thinking. And that was really smart to do before communicating, right? Because you want to be clear. And it's really important to be able to give your partner or partners that same, you know, respect of like, okay, I want you to think it through. And I actually think I missed something before when I said it, like when you're not getting a need or a want met. I also think sometimes that conversation comes when the situationship really is feeling like a committed relationship, right? Like maybe you're like, dang, I'm doing a lot for you, or we're hanging out all the time, or you are taking away from friend time. and it may be all good, but that may still require for you a conversation because you're feeling like you're committing a lot of yourself to that relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just didn't think about that one already.
No, but that's definitely a great point. I feel like, relationships are a commitment, but if you're having that commitment without the relationship, it's kind of like overwhelming in a way, because it's like, okay, so I'm having this commitment and then I'm not getting, all of the perks or the benefits that come with being in a relationship as well.
Exactly.
So it's like, you kind of want all of it, all of the whole package. And if you're not getting that entire package, it's like, I don't know
what
about
are we doing?
this. Yeah, exactly.
And you got to be ready to be like, okay, I'll walk if I don't get, the security, the respect.
Exactly.
That I
know. That's such a good point. I feel like a lot of people, at least like from the experiences that I've heard from like friends and things like that, they will ask this question, get a response that they don't like, but they will still they're not prepared to leave. I feel like at that point, when you're asking that question, you need to be prepared, think of all the scenarios and say what am I going to do in this scenario? If I don't hear what I need, then I need to be okay with stepping away from this relationship.
Well, I'm always like, it doesn't always have to be black and white. Like, there is a lot of gray area.
Exactly.
My bad. But where you can think about, is there a compromise? Or is there something, like you were talking about, you're putting in a lot of effort, but you want, security. So maybe that would just be that, that person is agreeing to being monogamous, like I mentioned before. Maybe that for someone is a sense of security.
Exactly.
Or it's just if we hook up with other people, we'll not be in our friend circle.
Right.
You know what I
Exactly,
mean? There's people we know.
Exactly.
So there could be compromises. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, but you also have to figure that out before you have that conversation. What would I be willing to kind of negotiate on, and what are the things that are hard stops, things that I know are just making me unhappy.
Yeah.
And if you continue to stay in something that's making you unhappy, it's likely not going to change, even though I know it's hard to get out of.
Yeah.
Exactly. If you had one message for our viewers, what would that be with regard to situationships?
Gosh, one only.
I know.
Gosh. Regardless of the type of relationship, all relationships should include respect, whether that's respect to someone's bodily autonomy, boundaries, consent, and just open conversations around that. And I know a lot of people think those conversations are quite uncomfortable or awkward, but actually you're having them all the time in other day-to-day things. So really with intimate partners, sexual partners, dating partners, it's so much more important that you have those. So I would just say, regardless of whatever your relationship is, label or not, it should include respect, boundaries, and consent.
And then we have maybe one or two questions that can be answered by you that our viewers might, benefit from. I guess for the first one, we can start with, what are some red flags of a situationship?
Ooh, oh my God, I'd be curious what you both think.
Oh.
So it's how do I be not specific? I mean, I'll say definitely we should trust our instincts and our gut. If we don't feel if we're starting to feel unsafe, or if we're starting to feel like we're being asked to do things or put in situations that we're not comfortable with, or that we don't want to be in. I think that's definitely a red flag.
Absolutely.
What about you?
I think maybe a red flag would be not taking your feelings into consideration. So I feel like if they, put their feelings over your feelings, or just neglect your feelings in general, I feel like that's definitely a red flag for anyone to see. And just kind of let you know that this really shouldn't be a person that you should be, putting all your energy into.
Absolutely.
Especially if they don't respect you in the way that you probably respect them. So I feel like respect is definitely supposed to be there.
Yeah, I would say basically along those lines, just making sure that, they, like you said, respect your feelings and understand that regardless of what's going on, whether it's serious or unserious, the respect needs to be there. I feel like some people lose the idea of that. They're oh, just because this is a casual relationship, we're just hooking up or whatever, I can do whatever, and I can just say whatever and whatever. But at the end of the day, you need to respect this person as if they're just a regular person. Like, treat them as your friend, you know?
Exactly.
It's just
like a friend.
I feel like the respect kind of is diminished in a situationship. Like, they treat them even worse than they would like a regular, like a stranger at that. So I feel like just that's a big red flag for me, like just feeling like they don't have respect for you, period.
I agree.
Yeah,
that's a big one.
Okay. And then last question. I'm pretty sure you'll probably have information about this one. Where can people go to talk or get support on casual situationships?
Yeah. Well, I love this podcast and everything y'all are doing. So
Yeah.
keep it up. You know, I think it's always good if you have like good social support, like friends, family, people you know that know you, who can kind of bring you back to like, hey, I know this isn't you, or I know this is what you care about, and ground you in that. But I also think sometimes our friends and family are totally biased and not really good at being like objective about things. So I definitely think, you know, there's a million ways you can come to counseling and mental health and talk to somebody, whether it's one time and it's anonymous, or you start in therapy, or you go to a group or a workshop. I think that there's a lot of ways to explore this with a professional that can be super helpful, especially figuring out what it is that you want. At KRSC especially, we have this really cool workshop series this spring called our Empowerment Workshop Series, which is kind of a really nice complement to the gray area. It's all about interpersonal relationships and feeling empowered in those relationships. They can be dating, sexual, or just friendships and families. And so it talks a lot about boundary setting, talks a lot about you know, trusting your gut, like I talked about. So those workshops are weekly on Wednesdays at 4, and you can join virtually. And then there's a lot of cool stuff happening on this campus where different like communities are talking about this. I know there's been things at the student equity inclusion programs, and one that's coming up in March, I think, is called Situationships, where they're going to have boba.
That's cute. That's actually so cute.
And they're going to talk about queer situationships at the LGBTQ Center with some of our experts here from KRSC and Queer to Peer, where they're going to talk about how this, you know, may look differently in LGBTQ plus relationships, but it's still kind of a lot of the same nuances. So there's a lot of energy around wanting to talk about this with students. So I would either find something that's happening in one of the centers on campus, or definitely look at our website, Student Health. We're always down to talk about these things.
Awesome. Love that.
So if you're in a situationship, you got places to go. Okay, you have resources at your disposal.
Yes. Awesome. Okay, I guess that wraps it up. I hope you guys found this episode beneficial to you. If you're in a situationship, I definitely would recommend maybe setting boundaries, talking to your person about, you know, what the future holds for you guys, and being ready for that person to take time to answer, but then also, you know, reflecting on whether or not your needs are being met and whether or not the situationship, you know, kind of is something that your well-being can, you know, take, or, you know, if you have the bandwidth or capacity to even continue it. So I feel like just being open to doing some reflection on that is super important.
Yeah, and I feel like it's important to remember that every relationship is unique, and so I know we gave a lot of advice today, but it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. So definitely just, you know your situation best. So just try to navigate it the best that you can. And
And we're here to support.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Thanks for watching.
Awesome.
Bye.
Bye. Fight on.